Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Tinnell. I am a Senior Reference Archivist here at the Library of Virginia, and I'd like to welcome you to Find Your Family History Part 1. With the recent cancellation of this spring's beginner and intermediate genealogy workshops, the Library of Virginia has decided to offer a 3-part webinar series to help you trace your roots. 2 other presentations will be available in the following weeks. At the end of this presentation, there will be a live question and answer session hosted by staff members on the Library of Virginia's Finding Your Roots Facebook group page. I will also provide the contact information for the Library of Virginia reference staff if you have a question about the Library of Virginia collections. Today's agenda. In part 1 of the series, we will be covering 1, how to start documenting your family history, 2, tips and strategies for beginning genealogical research, and 3, an overview of the types of sources that can be useful. This program is meant to be a general overview, but I will admit that my professional expertise as well as my personal family research is focused on Virginia materials. So that will comprise the bulk of my examples. However, the majority of these tips should be translatable to whatever state your research takes you to. Before we dive in, just a little bit of background about the Library of Virginia. The Library of Virginia is the library and state archives for the state of Virginia. It was established in 1823 by the Virginia General Assembly. We currently hold approximately 129 million manuscripts, 3 million printed resources, 65,000 maps. You can visit our website at www.lva.virginia.gov to search our catalog and collections, our ever-expanding number of digital collections, and also check for updated information on closings, directions, and programs. Getting started. When beginning the process of genealogical research, I find that the most important rule is to start with yourself and work backwards. Not always the most exciting approach, I know, but it is essential to success. It can be tempting to go the other way, especially if there's a juicy family story or someone famous in the lineage. But working from the known to the unknown is really the only way to ensure that you are proving your family history. You are the starting point, and you can begin your research at the earliest point that you can confirm. Once you write down everything that you know, the next step is to talk to relatives. Contact older members of the family or a family historian if there is one. Interview them concerning their knowledge of the family and get as much detail as possible, including names, nicknames, where ancestors lived, where they're buried, dates of birth, death, and marriage. Also look for family documents. Is there a family Bible? If so, who has it? If there are photographs, can you find someone who can identify the subjects who are in it? Are there newspaper clippings or other items that might be owned by extended family members? Begin to collect these items and record and organize the family stories. This can give you a roadmap to follow so you can see where the gaps are and where to focus your research efforts. However, you should be skeptical of these stories until you find facts to support them. I also like to remind people to try to stay objective. You don't choose your ancestors, so their behavior, good or bad, is no reflection on you. Now you are ready to begin your research, and here are some basic tips. First of all, you want to look for low-hanging fruit. You may not have to reinvent the wheel on this one. Has someone already done some of the research for you? Consult published family histories. Even unpublished collections of genealogical notes and charts can be a good place to start. Those which cite original sources as proof of lineage are certainly the most credible. However, it should be corroborated by your own review. So I always like to say, trust but verify. Consult printed abstracts and transcripts of records when possible, but know that not all records have been published, and look at the originals yourself when possible. Be thorough. Look at every record for the place and time where your ancestors lived. And if there are gaps in the records, try to figure out why and look for alternatives. For example, my mother's family is from Hanover County, Virginia, which unfortunately suffered major record loss. The early will books were destroyed in the evacuation fire of Richmond in April of 1865 during the Civil War. But a family dispute over an estate of an ancestor ended up in court, and his will was entered as an exhibit in the court case, which did survive. So this is at least one instance where a family suing each other actually turned out to be a good thing. When researching, it is also very important to be alert to spelling variations. Names can be spelled a number of ways, and many people were illiterate themselves, so the clerk or census taker simply wrote down the name the way they thought it was spelled. You also want to be sure to look out for people who are using nicknames or initials, and be alert for mistakes, misspellings, or transcription errors. Again, when in doubt, look at the original yourself. The example to the right of the screen involves my great-great-uncle, Crozier Houston Tinnell. The top image is his actual name, which is Crozier. The middle image is how his name appeared on the 1910 census. The census taker wrote Crosier, and the bottom image, you can see how it was indexed by a modern day person as Crasier, Crozier Tinnell. I did not know him personally, so that might be accurate, but you can see how these names are easily changed just one letter at a time. Now, uncommon names can be easily mangled, but also be careful when dealing with ancestors with common names. You need to be sure that that ancestor is yours. Are you really sure that that John Smith is your? Also, make sure you get the most out of the records that you do find. Keep a dictionary handy to look up legal or medical terms that you encounter that you may not be familiar with. That way, if you do find a document, you can fully understand what it is telling you. Beware of city and county formations. Lines changed continuously over time, and people didn't necessarily move, but the lines moved around them. New counties, even new states, including West Virginia and Kentucky, for example, were formed from Virginia and can affect where documents are recorded. Find out how things are organized in the city, state, or parish of the state that you're interested in. Figure out what would be recorded at the local level as opposed to what would be recorded at the state level. For example, in Virginia, marriages prior to 1853 are only recorded at the local level, whereas marriages after 1853 are recorded at the state level. Recognize that record keeping was not the same today as it was back then. Try to think about how and when your ancestor would have had an opportunity to interact with state or local governments. Take some time to look at local histories to get some knowledge of the history, culture, and economy of the time. If you find relevant records, and I hope that you do, always copy them in some form. If you copy pages out of a book, always copy the title page for reference later. You want to make sure that you label the source of information so that others may follow your trail or so that you can retrace your steps later. Many times I have helped a patron with a Xerox copy from research that they did years before, and they have no idea where it came from. So do yourself a favor and leave yourself some breadcrumbs. Keep careful notes of what you've searched, what sources you've explored, even if you didn't find anything. Research is often done in spurts where you have to pick it up and put it down. So again, leave yourself some notes so if you come back to it, you don't forget what you've already done and have to repeat those steps again. Use the internet as a tool for genealogical research, but understand that not everything has been digitized, and some of the information can be unsubstantiated or incorrect. Cast a wide net. Don't be afraid to broaden your search if you don't find records where you thought that they should be. Collections can end up anywhere. For example, on the right-hand side of the screen is my grandparents' marriage license. My mother's family is from Virginia, several generations back, but when I was doing my own family research, I could not find a record of my grandparents being married in Virginia. As it turns out, my mother's parents drove down across the state line to North Carolina one day and eloped, and then drove back the next day. I didn't learn this until I started asking family members questions. So this image here on the right is my Virginia grandparents' North Carolina marriage license. Also, it is very important to keep checking back periodically. No institution's or websites' collections are static. New materials are being donated and processed all the time. Not if, but when you get stuck, because you will at some point. If you hit a dead end in your direct line, don't neglect siblings. Tracing records of collateral ancestors and descendants can be very helpful. Also, research widows and second marriages. Keep an eye out for naming patterns within families and for surnames as middle names. These can often help you make some family connections. If all else fails, research everyone with that surname in a particular area. Check out research guides on a particular topic or type of record and see how the records are arranged and what information you might glean from them. If you're interested, the Library of Virginia has many of these research guides available on our website. Please do not be afraid to ask for help. If you need help with technology or indexes or particularly old handwriting, which can be very difficult sometimes, ask questions, talk to staff members and other researchers who might be researching the same family or area. Let them know what you're working on because you never know who might be able to help you. Check out blogs or message boards for clues, and certainly these days a lot of people are also using DNA to make some connections. Just a few things to remember when you're getting started on this endeavor. The first thing that I would like to stress is to be patient. Genealogical research is a step-by-step process and it takes time. Don't expect to accomplish all of this in one afternoon. Go into this knowing that depending on your goals, you are embarking on a project that might never be completely finished. If you just think to yourself that you want to go back 10 generations, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, that will comprise over 1,000 ancestors. So don't be too hard on yourself and understand that it might take time to acquire the research skills necessary. Each repository is different in terms of their collections, policies, and catalogs. Temper your expectations and make sure you don't give up too quickly. Many researchers get frustrated and leave when they can't find what they want easily. Ask for help if you need it. And although there could be many twists, turns, and roadblocks, try to enjoy the journey. Now, we are going to switch and talk about some of the best sources to use for genealogical research. And there are two main types. The first to start off with is, of course, published sources. These can be a good place to start if you don't have any specific records identified. Many people prefer starting with the books because they are easy to use and they are often indexed by name. Published family histories can be helpful. Maybe someone's already done some of the work for you, and they can certainly come in handy when families have moved large distances, for example, state to state or country to country. Local histories can also be helpful if you know where your ancestors lived. They can give you some history of the settlement of that area, important historical events that might have taken place, and prominent families in the area. Published abstracts, transcriptions, and indexes are invaluable and can save a lot of time so that you can check many counties quickly if you're not sure where your family was located. And for example, here at the Library of Virginia, our local history and genealogy room is dedicated to these indexes, and your library may have some as well. These can certainly include local county records, church records, military records, census indexes as well. And don't forget about newspapers either. Those can be important in terms of tracking down marriage notices and obituaries. City directories can be useful to figure out where people were living, what their occupations were. Certainly, published passenger lists can be important in terms of people entering the country, and you might find some good information in published family association newsletters. The second category, and this is the category of records that I certainly spend most of my time with, are archival sources. There are four main types, and we will go through each one separately. Of course, federal, state, local, and private records. The first to start off with are the federal records, and of course, census can be a great place to start. They are done every 10 years. They began in the United States in 1790, but unfortunately, not all of those years survive. For example, the first one that survives for Virginia is 1810. You want to keep in mind that the census does not list everyone in the household until 1850, and they are closed for 72 years from the date of creation. Most people want to look at the census to get the names and ages of individuals, and that's great, but the census can give you a whole lot more. Different census forms ask different questions, including nationality, place of birth, value of property, literacy, occupation. So make sure you look at all of the columns available on the census because they can provide a wealth of information. Military records can also be useful. Certainly, federal military service records can tell you when or where someone served in the armed forces. Federal pension applications can be important in terms of the veteran, but if a widow or heirs are applying for the benefits, it can also give you some information about those family relationships. Federal bounty land can also be important to figure out how veterans moved around the country and ended up somewhere else. Certainly, particularly in the 20th century, federal immigration and naturalization records can also be integral to your research. The second category are state records, and the holdings are going to vary by state. So whatever state you're researching, you're going to want to check with them and see when their holdings begin for each type of record. Vital statistics are the official record and are certainly the gold standard of proof in terms of genealogical research. They provide the names of parents, locations, dates in terms of births, deaths, marriages, divorces, and adoptions. Tax records can also be important. They are generally levied by the state on an annual basis. And for example, in Virginia, they begin in 1782. Land taxes can tell you, of course, how much land a person owned, where it was located. It can give you clues about land passing down within families and help you track people moving in and out of the area. Personal property taxes can also be used to see what assets families are paying tax on and give you an idea of when individuals are reaching the age of majority and beginning their own households. Also in Virginia, land records were kept by the state for the Virginia State Land Office. In Virginia, these records begin in 1623 and can oftentimes be the first record of someone's immigration into the colony. Military records also exist on the state level. For example, in our collection, just take the Revolutionary War, for example, we have state pension applications, we have public service claims for individuals providing supplies to support the Army, and we also have military service bounty land warrants. Additionally, we have all sorts of government records that can be useful. In some cases, there might be mental health records. There could also be things like legislative petitions to the General Assembly. For example, in Virginia, you could not receive a divorce in the colonial period unless you petitioned the General Assembly. Also, in some cases, there might be criminal records as well. Next up is local records, and the bulk of the research is probably going to be done in this series of records. Individuals generally have the most interaction with their local courts, starting with probate records, which are associated with the settling of an estate. So for example, wills and inventories, fiduciary records and accounts will show how estates are being settled, how property is being divided, and may provide the names of heirs and widows, including married daughters, which sometimes is difficult to find. Bonds can be important either for executors of the estate or guardians for minor children. Land records, including deeds, plats, and surveys, can show land passing back and forth. Descriptions of the properties can also tell you who the neighbors are and give some clues to the intermarriage between families. Many people don't consider court records, but those can actually be very useful in terms of doing genealogical research. Minute books and order books are essentially a docket of what's going on in court that day, but they can include many things, including early naturalization records. Loose papers, which are essentially the case files of the actual court cases, can also be very important, either in criminal cases or in cases of equity. Again, these can be disputes over debts or disputes over the settling of an estate. Tithables are essentially another name for early poll taxes, which can be useful, and certainly marriage records of all types, including bonds and consents for those under age, ministers' returns, and registers. The last category of records in the archival section that we're going to talk about today encompass a wide variety of records. So certainly church records, minutes and vestry books include church business. Registers might include baptism, marriage, and burial records. Bible records are hugely important prior to the start of vital statistics records. Also, another example from my own personal research is on the right hand of the screen. This is a family Bible that came down through the family to my father, And if you will notice on the left-hand side in blue ink, you will see Crozier Houston Tinnell makes another appearance. Genealogical collections donated by other researchers can also be helpful in terms of notes, charts, and family files. Cemetery records can be used in terms of interment cards, plot maps. Is there a family plot in the cemetery that could help you draw some conclusions about family relationships? Is there any information off of tombstone inscriptions? Business records might include things like funeral homes or insurance companies, and certainly organizational records, particularly if you can find the records of lineage societies, can be very helpful if you can find applications of individuals who are part of your family line. Certainly, if you happen to run across a collection of personal papers that has to do with the family that you're researching, this can be invaluable in terms of diaries, correspondence, ephemera, and other items. As we all know, African American research can provide some unique challenges, especially prior to 1870. So there are some particular records that might be useful to those doing African American research. In terms of local records, you may find registers of free people. In the deed books, you can certainly look for deeds of emancipation. In will books, you might find wills or inventories if an enslaved individual is listed as part of an estate. And in the courts, you may find some freedom suits. At the state level, particularly in Virginia, again, legislative petitions can be useful. After 1806, those people who had been emancipated had to petition to remain in the state. In terms of federal records, there are special censuses, there are slave schedules in 1850 and 60, and certainly post-emancipation, you will find a wealth of information in the Freedmen's Bureau records, including cohabitation registers and records from the Freedmen's Bank. Just a few research tips here for using the web. The other sessions in this series are going to focus on this, so just a brief mention here. You do want to look at the search tips and frequently asked questions provided on a website so that you can maximize your search results. You want to try searching multiple spellings, initials, nicknames. And for example, I always give this example of my great-great-grandmother. Her name legally was Margaret Camilla, but in all of the records, she went by Cammie. And as you can see in the photograph on the left-hand side of the screen, she even has Cammie on her tombstone. Do some wildcard searches. Sometimes less is more. Focus on unusual names or other household members if you have trouble locating the particular ancestor that you're looking for. Again, look at all columns of information available on the records that you are searching. You may want to browse a location, and as always, be aware of indexing errors. Now, there's a lot of information online these days, but at a certain point, you're going to have to go in person. When you are preparing for a visit, there are certain things you're going to want to do before you go. See if the institution has a website or online catalog to check out beforehand. Make sure they have collections that at least appear relevant to the research that you're doing. You would be surprised at how many people plan trips and come hundreds of miles without ever checking to see if we have collections that they need. So please check out the website or pick up the phone and give the research institution a call. Check ahead for hours, closings, parking restrictions. Are there things that you can and cannot bring? Do you need an appointment? Each institution has different policies. Make sure you bring your notes. I cannot stress this enough. Again, many people show up and they've left all of the research that they've already done at home. Make sure that you have a priority list and plan of attack. You don't want to spend valuable research time trying to figure out what you're looking for. Be focused. How much time do you have, and what can you reasonably expect to accomplish? Also, see what might be available through interlibrary loan that you can borrow later, so that you focus on the items that you can only research in person. Also, ask the staff for advice. Once you start your research and start collecting documents, of course, you're going to have to start organizing it. You're going to want to consolidate information from different sources, and when you do this, it might help you put some things together and start making some connections. When you do find things, organize it so it's easy for you to access later. This can be done through family tree charts, the good old-fashioned photocopies and file folders, computer programs, website tree builders. I get asked this question a lot of how best to organize your research, and I have to tell you, my response is usually the right answer is always just whatever works best for you. Just a quick research recap. You want to remember to start with yourself and work backwards, systematically, generation by generation. Gather family data and documents. Figure out what records exist, where to find them, and what information they might provide. Be patient, be thorough, cite, file, and organize your research. Check back periodically. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That is what we are there for. And also, again, try to enjoy the journey and have fun with it. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first part of a 3-part webinar series. The next 2 in the series will be the second on April 24th. My fellow reference archivist, Nathan Varilla, will demonstrate genealogical databases and other relevant websites, both free and subscription, for genealogical research. Then on May 8th, community outreach specialist Ashley Ramey will explore the Library of Virginia's website, including catalog and digital collections, to help you get started with your Virginia-based genealogical research. We encourage you to check our website and social media platforms for information on additional programming, and we certainly look forward to seeing you here at the library when we reopen. As promised, this is a list of the contact information for the reference departments here at the Library of Virginia. If you have questions later concerning the Library of Virginia collections, either archival or published sources, please feel free to give us a call or drop us an email. I also mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that this will be followed up with a live question and answer session hosted by the Library of Virginia staff members on the library's Finding Your Virginia Roots Facebook group page. Posts and comments on this page for genealogical research questions will be answered for 2 hours after the webinar ends, between 11 and 1 Eastern Standard Time on April 10th. If you're not already a member, please feel free to join our Facebook group at any time. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining me today for this introduction to beginning genealogical research, and I wish you the best of luck in your future research.